All right, so today's topic is patience, and that's when it comes to the DJI Avata 2. So when DJI first announces a product, typically there are certain things that are not compatible with that product. Same could be said for the Avata 2. You weren't able to use the Motion RC2, you couldn't use the Goggles 2, and you couldn't use the Goggles Integra. But that all changes today with the latest firmware update, along with a few new features being added. Let's get started. What's up guys, Ken here, you're watching OriginaldoBo, and today we're going to be talking about the latest firmware for the DJI Avata 2. Now this was just announced a couple of weeks ago, and when they did announce this, there was a couple of things about this release that I think made some people upset, such as the inability to be able to have backwards compatibility with the Goggles 2 and the Goggles Integra, which I know a lot of people invested in. In addition, you couldn't use the Motion RC2 and you couldn't use the FPV RC2, but DJI has just recently announced this firmware update that brings compatibility to those devices. In addition, the Motion RC2 will now be able to use the easy acro mode. So if that was something that you were interested in, you'll be happy to know that that feature is now available to the Motion RC2. And as far as new features go, the Avata 2 now has the capability to shoot 4K 100 frames per second. Previously, I would always avoid those super slow motion frame rates because at the lower resolutions, footage would just look very, very mushy and lack a lot of detail. But having that 4K option now will probably make me use it a little bit more frequently. Now, there's one thing to note about the 4K 100. If you don't see it available under your settings, you will need to toggle out of the 4x3 mode. So if you're somebody that likes to fly 4x3, you'll need to toggle over to 16:9 to be able to see the 4K 100 frames per second. And there's one other really notable feature that they added to this release, and it's only available for the Goggles 3, which is D-Log-M Assist, meaning that when you toggle over to D-Log, you'll now notice that there isn't much of a difference between flying in the regular mode and D-Log, and that's because they're adding that contrast back in for you. You can go ahead and toggle that off if you want to preview what D-Log will look like, but this will make lining up your shots a lot easier. It'll also make flying in areas like what's behind me a lot easier because you'll have more contrast to see trees, branches, moss. You get the idea. So I'm going to go ahead and put this up in the air now and test out that 4K 100. I'm using Rocksteady and I will be flying in D-Log-M. Let's go. Alrighty, so I gotta say that flew pretty good. Flying in 100 frames per second doesn't really feel much different than flying in 60 frames. So those of you that were wondering, there's really not a huge difference in 100 to 60 as far as like what you can physically see. Something I do want to make mention of though, which I found was a little weird, was that when I went to go arm the quad in manual, it wouldn't let me arm. I had to take off in normal mode and then switch to manual flight, even though after the firmware update, my switch was still preset to toggle it on in manual to arm it. So I'm not really sure what that's about. I'll have to take a closer look at that when I'm at the studio, but just something I want to make mention in case if you notice that as well. All right, we're back at the studio. I got a chance to go ahead and review the footage, and I have to say I'm pretty impressed with the quality coming out of the Avata's 4K 100 frames per second. It's nice to see that the footage isn't so degraded, because sometimes when you get into those higher frame rates, the footage gets very soft, sort of mushy, and it just doesn't have the same detail as 4K 60 or even 4K 30 frames per second. So it's nice to see we don't have that problem here. D-Log-M Assist on the Goggles 3 is really nice. It's probably my favorite feature, and it's a feature that I've been asking for forever. It's nice to preview what an image will look like when you're filming in log before actually capturing it. That way you can make a good determination of whether or not you should be filming in log or not. So you get all that dynamic range while still maintaining contrast, which was really important where I was flying around those trees. And why I chose that area specifically is because I know it's an area where I have snagged those moss before, and I didn't have any of those issues before because I was able to see them clearly and visibly, which is pretty sweet. Overall, I think this is a great update. I love the fact that DJI continues to improve products well after their release, along with bringing backwards compatibility to the Avata 2 and previous components for the Avata. All right, that's gonna do it for this video. If you enjoyed, smash that like button. And as always, I will see you in the next video, and stay original.
They checking for me, no one checking on me, so I had to go run up a check. I got the message on me, no flexing on me, my attorney gon' call and collect. Blessings on blessings for me, my successes only made them envious, they got upset. I had to put on it.